Sinai is a harsh desert of precipitous granite mountains and narrow, rock-strewn valleys. In the scriptures, it is called the waste, howling wilderness. Water is scarce, and few plants manage to survive. In this severe and barren land, it becomes difficult to sustain life. And yet, it was here that hermits and anchorites came in the latter 3rd and early 4th centuries, searching for places of solitude where they might pass their lives in prayer and fasting. But Sinai is more than a harsh desert, for it was here that God revealed himself in a special way to the prophet Moses, first at the bush that burned with fire without being consumed, and then at the peak of Sinai, where he received the tablets of the law. Here he beheld the tabernacle in divine vision, and was commanded to create its counterpart on earth, that the worship offered here below should be unto the example and shadow of heavenly things. Here also God revealed himself to the prophet Elias, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a still small voice, or as it says in the Greek of the Septuagint, phoni avras leptis, the voice of a gentle breeze. One of the oldest surviving Christian pilgrim accounts is that of Egeria, who visited Jerusalem in the year 383. She worshipped at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which had been built only some 50 years before by the Emperor Constantine. From there, she continued on to Sinai, a distance of 22 staging posts. She climbed to the peak of Sinai, where a venerable hieromonk celebrated the liturgy for the assembled monks and pilgrims. She writes, "A hale old man, a monk from early life, an ascetis, as they say here. After the liturgy, the monks brought fruits from their gardens for the benefit of the pilgrims." And she writes, "The priests of that place gave us evlogias, that is, of fruits which grow on the mountain." She then venerated the cave of the prophet Elias a short distance below the summit, and was diligent to read the appropriate scriptures from the books of the kings. Only then did she descend to the opposite valley, and she writes, "There are a great number of monastic cells of holy men there, and a church in the place where the bush stands. The bush is alive to this day and sends out green shoots." In the latter 4th century, she witnessed what was already a flourishing monastic presence, and was herself even then following an established pilgrim route. Incorporating Greek words into her account, ascetis, evlogias, she shows us what we should have known even without such quotations. From the 4th century, Sinai was an extension of the Holy Land, the far reaches of the Holy Land. As such, it was also a part of the Greek-speaking world. And yet, if Greek was a language of the Sinai monks at that time, it was not exclusively so, for Sinai was the destination of monks and pilgrims from the whole of Christendom. The Piacenza pilgrim visited Sinai in the middle of the 6th century, when the fortress walls of the monastery would only recently have been completed. He writes, "They led us into the valley between Horeb and Sinai. At the foot of the mountain is that spring where Moses saw the sign of the burning bush, and at which he gave water to his sheep. The spring is enclosed within a monastery, and the monastery is surrounded by fortified walls. In it are 3 elders who are learned in several languages, I mean Latin and Greek, Syriac, Egyptian, and Besson, as well as many translators of individual languages. To visit Sinai is to step back in time, entering a world that has reached us remarkably intact from late antiquity. It has 3 hallmarks, or distinguishing characteristics. The first is the basilica itself. Procopius, in the 6th century historian, writes, "The Emperor Justinian built for them a church which was dedicated to the Mother of God, so that they might be enabled to pass their lives therein, praying and holding services." Remarkably, after 1400 years, this is still the case. While pious offerings and adornments have been added to the church over the centuries, yet the basic structure remains intact, and it is easy to envision the church as it was when it was first constructed, the walls and columns with the hewn granite still visible, a tymplan at the front with panels of carved Proconnesian marble and columns of porphyry surmounted by an epistyle, and the synthronon behind the holy table with the elevated throne for the bishop in the center. Completely unchanged from the 6th century are panels of book-matched marble on the wall behind, with a splendid mosaic above depicting at the top left Moses of the burning bush, at the top right Moses receiving the tablets of the law, and in the apse below the transfiguration of Christ. The second characteristic of Sinai is that it remained faithful to the Church of the 7 ecumenical councils. When 3 of the traditional patriarchates passed out of the Roman Empire in the early 7th century, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, yet spiritually they remained in communion with Rome and Constantinople. In this way, they transcended the separation and remained spiritually affiliated with the ancient centers as they had before. And the third characteristic would be the spiritual heritage preserved at Sinai. There are 3 saints whose texts form a distinctly Sinite school of ascetic theology. The first is St. John Climacus, abbot of Sinai and author of the Ladder of Divine Ascent, who lived in the latter 6th and early 7th century. St. John writes with profound insight about Hezekiah, quietude, spiritual vigilance, the recitation of the Jesus prayer. Here we can recognize the Hezekiah's prayer of the heart, developed later in Constantinople and on Mount Athos, but present at Sinai in the 6th century. The second is Hezekias the priest, abbot of the monastery of the Burning Bush, who lived around the 8th and 9th centuries. He wrote an ascetic treatise on watchfulness and holiness, in which he stressed the central importance of inner attentiveness, the guarding of the heart, and the unceasing invocation of Jesus Christ. Philotheus of Sinai, the third, was also abbot of the monastery of the Burning Bush. He is known to us from his work, 40 Texts on Watchfulness. He lived in perhaps the 9th or 10th century. He writes, "At every hour and moment let us guard our heart with all diligence from thoughts which darken the soul's mirror. For on that mirror Jesus Christ, the wisdom and power of God the Father, forms himself and luminously inscribes himself." All of Sinai's long and complex history is reflected in the library, which contains 3,300 manuscripts written in 11 languages, of which the largest categories are Greek, Arabic, Syriac, Georgian, and Slavonic. The number was supplemented with manuscripts recovered from the Tower of St. George in 1975, collectively known as the New Finds. In addition, there is the archive, which contains records and correspondence. It also holds some 1,000 Arabic scrolls and 800 Ottoman scrolls, many of them decrees from rulers guaranteeing the rights and prerogatives of the monastery. We also have some 10,000 early printed books, the majority of them in Greek, and another 10,000 modern books. Here are a few special manuscripts. The oldest scribal signature in the Sinai library is found in Greek 32, an 8th century manuscript of the Odes and Psalms containing the Beatitudes. Having written the entire manuscript in a confident Greek majuscule, the scribe added his own name in Arabic. He wrote, "May God help you, my brother, and give you understanding. Remember me, my brother, for the sake of God." And below, the Psalter has been written in the place of God, Mount Sinai, by the sinner Michael, the disciple of Abba Philotheos. New Finds Majuscule 26, dated to the 9th or 10th century, consists of 13 leaves from Homer's Iliad, giving lines of the poem alternating with the paraphrasis by Sophronius. New Finds Majuscule 5 and 56 are a tropologion. They have been important in establishing a new critical edition of the iambic canons attributed to John of Damascus. Arab rule reached Palestine and Syria in the early 7th century, and by the 8th century, Christians were adopting Arabic as their own language. Greek 36 is a bilingual psalter written in majuscule Greek and Kufic Arabic. It dates from the 8th or 9th century. This is an early example of the translation of scriptures into Arabic. Greek 204 is a lectionary containing the gospel readings for 71 feast days. It dates from the 10th century and was created in the Imperial Scriptoria of Constantinople. There are 7 illuminations at the beginning of the manuscript. These are some of the most brilliant examples of what has been called the Macedonian Renaissance, when the classical mode of painting, which had never been entirely lost, was strongly evident, and at the same time in perfect harmony with the more abstract and non-classical mode by which the Byzantine iconographer was able to convey the physical and the spiritual, the human and the divine. Following the illuminations, every letter on every page is executed in gold leaf. The letters flash and gleam as the pages are turned. Sinai has beautiful manuscripts with brilliant illuminations. But the library also contains many humble volumes, psalters and ephrologia, generally small in size, intended for individual reading. The edges of the pages are stained from long use. Some of them have been repaired with whatever materials were at hand, bindings or even split pages sewn back together with thread and rough stitches. These manuscripts are no less significant, emblems of prayer and devotion, and witnesses to the austerity and privations of Sinai in centuries gone by. Sinai Greek 898 is an orologion written in the year 1335 from the prayers of the 6th hour. Let thy tender mercies, O Lord, speedily go before us, for we are become exceeding poor. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of thy name. 2 important recent projects. In 2017, we completed the renovation of the Sinai Library, a project begun 8 years earlier. The existing building, which dates from 1951, was stripped back to its reinforced concrete frame and built out again. The result is now a very beautiful building for the storage of the Sinai manuscripts and early printed books, with a reading room for visiting scholars. But more importantly, the manuscripts are now in a more stable environment with a sophisticated fire protection system. And we have begun to enclose some 2,000 manuscripts and 200 important early printed books in protective archival steel boxes. For all of these projects have been made possible by the St. Catherine Foundation, and we are grateful for their support. The Sinai Monastery was a center of scribal activity, but the remoteness of the site meant that it was often impossible to obtain a supply of fresh parchment. The solution was to take an older manuscript, erase the text, and use the valuable parchment a second time. This accounts for the high proportion of palimpsests at Sinai. A number of these underlying texts were known from the 19th century, identified from words and phrases that protrude into the margins. But the recovery of these texts was quite difficult. It seemed they had been lost forever. Multispectral imaging is a new technology in which a palimpsest is photographed with separate wavelengths of light. The resulting photographs are then combined and processed to exploit the differences in fluorescence between the 2 or more levels of writing. We began the Sinai Palimpsest project in 2011, when some of the leading experts in the field agreed to work with the Sinai manuscripts. The technology continued to advance through the course of the 5-year project. Also, we became better at detecting palimpsest texts, so the number of palimpsests at Sinai also continued to expand. Thus, the photography of palimpsests at Sinai is far from over. But the result of the Sinai Palimpsest project are startling. 6,800 pages photographed from 74 manuscripts, revealing 284 erased texts in 10 languages. All of these images are online at the address sinaipalimpsest.org. We're grateful to the Arcadia Fund, which generously supported the Sinai Palimpsest project. We must also thank Michael Phelps of the Early Manuscripts Electronic Library, who directed the project, coordinating the work of the photographers and the imaging scientists. We must also thank Professor Claudia Rapp from the University of Vienna, who created the catalog entries for the palimpsests and oversaw the many scholars working on these texts. a current project. The current digital photography program is a direct continuation of the Sinai palimpsest project, utilizing the same infrastructure for the storage of the resulting images in multiple locations and resources for online access. The program now expanded with the purchase of additional digital photography workstations and the hiring of additional staff. Our equipment does not have to be portable. In fact, the workstations are massive. We use phase 1 cameras that have 100 megapixel resolution. The lighting has been carefully calibrated. Each file is embedded with a metadata header, and for these we use standard protocols created in coordination with the digital library personnel at UCLA. It is our goal to photograph all the manuscripts of the Sinai Library, but this is best done in increments. Some years before, Professor Sebastian Brock of the Oxford Oriental Institute pointed out that the Greek manuscripts of Sinai are more numerous, but the Syriac and Arabic manuscripts are of more importance to scholars. Syriac was a language spoken in Upper Mesopotamia. In the late antique world, Syriac-speaking villages stretched from the Mediterranean to the foothills of the Zagros and from Antioch to Ctesiphon, the Persian capital. Many important works of Greek philosophy, literature, and medicine were translated into Syriac. Many important works of scriptural exegesis and edifying spiritual homilies were written in Syriac. Sinai also has manuscripts in Christian Palestinian Aramaic, the language of Western Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Levant. Syria, Palestine, and Egypt came under Arab rule in the early 7th century. By the 8th century, Christians were expressing themselves in Arabic. In the 8th and 9th centuries especially, many works were translated into Arabic, some from Greek, but many more from Syriac. And many works were written in Arabic. In the Sinai manuscripts, we can trace all of these developments. Peter Brown has expressed this well. In the Christian Arabic manuscripts preserved at the monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai, we can listen to a Christianity of the Middle East that resolutely combined engagement with the Islamic presence and loyalty to its own past. They show that Christianity found its own voice in the Arabic language so as to contribute to the exuberant new Arabic culture. The Chalcedonian monasteries of Palestine and Sinai were places where speakers of Greek, Syriac, Arabic, and Georgian lived and worked together, and these became centers for a dynamic literary collaboration between all of these linguistic communities. The ascetical homilies of St. Isaac the Syrian, for example, were translated from Syriac into Greek in the 8th century, from Syriac into Arabic in 885, from Syriac into Georgian in 907, all at the monastery of Marsava outside Jerusalem. There is an increasing awareness among scholars in the field of Byzantine studies that you cannot do justice to the history of that time without taking into account the Syriac and Arabic-speaking worlds. Our project coincides with this expanded interest, and we are confident that it will do much to promote this development. Today, many Christians are leaving the Middle East. We need to remind them and the world of their own rich heritage. At a time when nationalism seems an increasing phenomenon on a worldwide scale, the Sinai Arabic manuscripts are evidence of the part that the Sinai community, Greek and Orthodox in its heritage, has played in its relations with the Arabic-speaking world. They support the Sinai monastery's place as an intrinsic part of Egypt's long and multifaceted history. All of these observations make the photography of the Syriac and Arabic manuscripts especially relevant today. We began the project in May 2018. Already we have taken some 300,000 photographs, and we are on schedule to finish the project early next year. Michael Phelps of the Early Manuscripts Electronic Library is directing this project as well. The program has made possible with grants from the Amundsen Foundation and the Arcadia Fund. We are grateful for their support. Historically, Sinai was unimaginably remote and difficult to reach. Only the most hardy and resolute souls could venture into this stark wilderness. All of this changed some 50 years ago with the construction of the present roads and the development of the infrastructure to support visitors to the area. And now there are times when the monastery receives 1,000 visitors every day. Many lament this change, but Archbishop Damianos has tried to see it in a positive light. He has said, "No monastery is today so isolated as it once was, and perhaps this is in the providence of God, that when many are looking for inspiration and consolation, the spiritual heritage that has been preserved here for so many centuries should be more accessible and better known. It is a privilege to live at such a place, and we are obligated to share our heritage." The Sinai manuscripts are the texts that guided and sustained the monks in their devotion. They are the tangible evidence of Sinai's spiritual heritage. The Sinai monastery can trace a history extending back over 1,700 years, but this does not mean that we can take its continued history for granted. In the past, the monastery was protected by its vast isolation and the austere deserts of Sinai. Ascetics reach great spiritual heights. Today, when so much around the monastery has changed, the community must find a way to continue what has reached us as a living tradition. It was the spiritual dedication of the monks that commanded the respect of all in the past. With this dedication, we will be able to meet the challenges of the future.